desperate for hope that recovery from your eating disorder is possible? Do you feel afraid, ashamed, alone, or misunderstood? Or maybe you know someone struggling, but you don't know how to help. Friend, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Recover with God podcast, where you'll hear stories of recovery, personal and professional advice, and hope that only comes from God. You are not alone. You are understood. And God is here right now to walk this journey with you. Hi there, and welcome to the Recover with God podcast. I'm your host, Jamie, and I believe God brought you here to listen for a reason today. I am joined by Brittany, who is a food, freedom, and body image coach for Christian women, as well as the host of her own podcast, the Joy-Filled Eater podcast. She's also a registered dietitian, but I'll stop there and let Brittany share the rest. Hey, Brittany, thank you for your heart. Thank you for your heart to speak on the podcast today. I am so thankful you're here.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Jamie, for having me. I'm excited to be a part of this.
All right. Well, I have a question that I love to ask every single guest, and it is on the topic of zeal. Zeal is one of my favorite words, and my own definition of the word is living with a passionate pursuit of a purpose. So, Brittany, can you tell me, what does living with zeal look like in your life right now?
Yeah, I love that definition. I think purpose is so important and so valuable. And I would say in the season of life, as at the time you guys are probably hearing this, one of my favorite things is really just pursuing my passion and purpose and calling within my family. I love my business and what I do, but I should be on maternity leave by the time you guys hear this. And so zeal will also be for us looking like um, adjusting and getting really excited about that transition into a family of 5 instead of 4 as we are living life with a newborn. I may feel slightly different about that when it gets here. I may be more excited about sleep. But I also really do love just like passionately leading my clients and students toward Christ-centered food freedom and better body image within my own practice and business. So those are two of the areas where I feel like I experience a lot of zeal.
I love that. Congratulations, first of all.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, it's great to have zeal in multiple areas of life for sure. You're personal and more professional, but I love that you have that passion to help other women, and that's why you're here. So, to dive into more questions, I'd love to open it up to you to share who you are, what you do, and just, why you wanted to be on the podcast today.
So like I said, I'm a wife and a mom. I've been married for going on 11 years. And how at the time of this recording, I've got 2 kiddos. Hopefully, by the time you guys are hearing this, we'll have our third in hand. And I started off my kind of journey or career moving into the dietetics field with an interest in sports nutrition, and quickly found out about how prevalent disordered eating, negative body image, full-blown diagnosed eating disorders are within that area. And kind of just to make a long story short, the Lord just really used that avenue to move me into the field of ministry of working with women who struggle with disordered eating and negative body image. And I have been doing that for several years now, I think exclusively since 2017, but also in the years prior at a higher level of care, kind of in a hospital setting. So it was through actually my own journey with infertility before we had our first son, that the Lord really showed me what it looks like to fully surrender to Him and how important surrender is when it comes to cultivating a real relationship with the Lord instead of trying to control everything. And so I think it was kind of through those avenues, through pursuing sports nutrition and then having that difficult but sweet season with the Lord during that infertility process, that He really used those to lead me into this area of disordered eating, negative body image eating disorders, and I have been, I guess, in this role now. I'm currently in a private practice setting, been here for about 4 years. And so I primarily work with women. Some have diagnosed eating disorders, and then some just are kind of all over the spectrum in their relationship with food. Maybe they struggle with anywhere from mild to severe restriction or mild to severe binge eating and all the behaviors in between. And so I love being able to support them from a coaching and education, mentorship kind of standpoint. And it is one of the joys of my life and one of the great pleasures that I get to work for myself and in a way that the Lord gets to be at the center of it all. So I love it.
That's a amazing story, and I know there's so many women out there who need help, professional help with wherever they're at. And I really appreciate that you brought up kind of being on a spectrum of where you're at with your relationship with food, because that's such an important topic as well. Even if you don't feel or have been diagnosed with a full-blown eating disorder, a lot of it starts with disordered eating, or even just living your whole life with disordered eating. That is not freedom. That is not fun. And I know from my own story, my eating disorder started with a lot of just disordered eating and just really not understanding nutrition
Yeah.
and thinking and listening to society, listening to, what was in magazines and diet culture, and thinking that was actually helpful and that was going to get me or make me happy, get me where I wanted to be. So I think it's so important wherever anyone is at. If you're listening and you're like, well, I don't have an eating disorder, it's important to talk about this too. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to have a diagnosis to deserve to talk about it
Mhm.
and get some support. Like any level of stress or anxiety or worry that you have around food or your body is not something that you are meant to or have to live with.
No, there is freedom. There is freedom. So if anyone's listening and
Yes.
you feel like
Amen.
it's not possible, please keep listening. It is. We will talk more about that. And I would love to hear now, it's just you describing how do you actually help women kind of overcome some of those disordered eating patterns or even body image issues, whatever they're struggling with, wherever they're at on that spectrum.
Yeah, so there's several different ways I do this from a practical standpoint. The majority of the women I work with through my membership community as well as kind of my courses. And so what I would love to share that I hope will be really practical and helpful for those of you listening today is maybe just to go over like a framework or two that I use strategically with my own clients to really help them focus on some key areas of their relationship with food, their body, and Jesus to really help cultivate a greater level of food freedom, body image, and part of that process is body trust. And so, kind of the body trust framework I really love to go into, I think would be helpful. So, Jamie, is that okay if I kind of just give you guys a little bit, hopefully, of some mindset and practical application when it comes to something that will hopefully help with those eating patterns?
I would love that. I would love for you to share whatever you're willing to share.
Perfect. Okay.
Mhm.
So I'll give just kind of a quick overview because this is something, like I said, I dive into really deeply with a lot of my clients. And this is just a small part of, I'd say a small part. It's a really important, critical part of the process, but it is one part. So the body trust framework is something that I created just to help people understand that body trust is really something that we've got to have before. So many people are like, let me just dive into intuitive eating. Like, let me learn how to do that. And that's a wonderful skill to develop. And it's not like the one best only right, solution. It can't be the first step, especially if you've been struggling with a lot of disordered eating patterns. And so it's a wonderful tool, but in order to be able to learn to eat intuitively, you've got to be able to trust the good body that Father designed you with. And there's a lot of things that can throw that trust off. And so the goal, there's like three main outcomes we get when we cultivate body trust. It's going to lead to a greater level of personal discernment, which is really important because we have to be able to discern what's going on in order to make wise choices about how we care for ourselves and our body. Um, we also get this outcome of just this sense of relief and peace in knowing that we're no longer bound by rigid food rules. And That is one of the reasons I call my podcast and my course the Joy Filled Eater podcast, because joy, like you just, when you have that sense of relief on, hey, I'm no longer feeling in bondage to these food rules, that finally frees you up to have a joy filled relationship with food instead of one that just feels full of stress and anxiety, right? Like Jamie, you probably have probably had tons of conversations with women. Maybe even you've had that experience yourself where you're like, food is not peaceful. Like eating is not peaceful. It's stressful.
Yes, even coming into when you go into like a holiday or anything like that, it was not fun. Holidays and birthdays and whatever you're celebrating should be fun. And every time there was like food involved in a gathering, it was very stressful for me. So yes, getting rid of that stress. And I love the word joy attached to what you're talking about, because that is how it should be and how I feel. And that's why I'm so passionate to talk about it too.
Yeah, yeah. And so this is something I would say I have a lot of zeal with in this process, right? To kind of bring it back to our earlier question.
Yes.
So those are the first two outcomes. So that greater level of personal discernment, and then that sense of relief and peace. These are things that are outcomes of cultivating body trust. And then the final like big one here is that you develop this confidence in your ability to care for yourself and your body. And that is one of the things that so many women, when they come to me, they're like, Brittany, I don't know how to feed myself in a way that feels good physically and where I don't feel, mentally deprived, right? Or I don't feel guilty. There's like this lack of confidence. And so that is something that when you learn how to cultivate body trust is kind of the gateway to what I would call body wisdom, which is one of the three main pillars of my program and what I teach inside, my course and membership community. And so the three main components of body trust. So the three things that we need in order to develop body trust. I'll touch on them real quickly, and then we can break each one down in whatever detail you would like to, or to whatever degree.
Okay.
The first one is interoceptive awareness, which is just really this fancy sciencey term, meaning that it's your ability to perceive those different physical sensations that arise within your body. So like your heart racing. Right, like if my 6-year-old were to hide behind the corner and I come out of my office and he jumps out and scares me, right? Like my heart's going to start racing, right? That is a level of awareness when your bladder starts getting full, when you're hungry. Okay, so that's the basic concept there. That's and I'll explain why as we go further. But
Sure.
the second one, not everybody loves, but most everybody needs to work on, and it's patience. Patience is extremely important and necessary when it comes to cultivating body trust, because we live in this society where we just want like instant reward, instant gratification, instant quote unquote results, right? Like I want to do something and I want to see exactly how it works immediately. Which is why so many people end up falling back and relying on, diets or diet plans, because hey, there's this specific process, and they tell me if I do this, 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 and this, then I'm gonna get these, quick results, right, or quick changes. And that can be it can be super dangerous mentally, but also physically. So patience is really important. We can dive into that further, but the third component of body trust is really this, and this is something I dive into a lot with a lot of the ladies I work with, because we are like really focused on Christ being at the center of this process. And I will just say very boldly, Christ is involved in the process, whether you want to admit that and recognize it or not. And so when we choose to bring the Lord into the process, it makes for a much faster, more efficient, more enjoyable journey to food freedom. And so that third component is really submission, and specifically submission to the Holy Spirit, not just submitting to our own will, desire, not even submitting to like, I tell my clients and my students, like, don't just go off of what I say, like take what I say and then take it to the Lord and ask him for wisdom. And like, what do I keep? And did Brittany say something today that she shouldn't have, right? Like maybe that was a little bit off, or that wasn't exactly what, you needed me to hear today. And so interoceptive awareness, patience, and submission are the three key components. And if you want to, we can kind of dive into each of those a little bit more.
Yeah, I would love that. I mean, those it's funny because as I was hearing you talk, I was thinking of my own recovery and just the steps that took me there. And specifically, I had bulimia, so my urges for binging were very strong. And so kind of thinking through like feeling those. And one of the things for me was recognizing like that urge is not going to kill me if I don't give into it. But like in my brain, it almost felt that way. And so I don't know, kind of I think that's just really interesting. And yes, as a perfectionist, I needed to learn patience as well um, with knowing that it wasn't going to be cold turkey of quitting. And then yes, I agree 100% that putting once I put God at the center of my recovery and submitted to him, said, I don't know what this is going to look like and I'm terrified, but I trust you. That made all the difference. So yes, I'd love for you to add anything you want onto that, but I just wanted to share if anyone else is potentially, especially recovering or thinking of recovering from bulimia, that this is so relevant.
Yeah, yeah. And I see this hold true with pretty much every client that I work with, regardless of what the specific behavioral struggles are, even from a mindset standpoint. Like you've got to be able to trust your body, because that first step, that first component of body trust, that interoceptive awareness, we kind of talked before about how like hunger is an example of this, right? Your bladder getting full. There's a big difference in being on a road trip and going, okay, I think I'm going to need to make a restroom stop in like within the half hour, right? Versus I need you to pull over right now, right? Like it doesn't go from, your bladder doesn't go from empty to all of a sudden I'm about to burst. It's like this slow progression, and our bodies do that with lots of things. And then some things are instantaneous, right? Like if something scared me, right? My heart is not going to just slowly start increasing. It's going to start like I'm gonna start like feeling it pounding in my chest, right? So
Right away. Yeah.
right. So without interoceptive awareness, we really have no basis for being able to make autonomous decisions about taking care of our body. When I say autonomous, I mean like for ourselves. Obviously, Christ is involved in this process as well, but without the influence of a dietary plan, an influencer, it can be any number of things, right? Your schedule. There's things that we want to take into consideration. We can't only listen to our bodies. That can lead us astray a lot, right? But we do want to be able to recognize, what is my body telling me? And then I mentioned like before, body trust is kind of this basis. It's kind of this prequel, if you will, to body wisdom. So we have to be able to tell what our body is communicating to us before we can decide, now what do I do with that? So once we are able to start recognizing how our body works and the ways in which that it's communicating with us, then we can start learning, how do I, like, what do I do with that? How do I honor those cues? How can I respond more quickly and do it in a way that's more intentional, so that I can steward my body well while spending less time focusing on it? And that is a huge piece of the peace and freedom and the relief that we talked about. Like, relief is one of those big outcomes of body trust, because when you can spend less time thinking about your body, you're going to be less obsessed with it and worried about it. And so the goal isn't that we stop thinking about our body altogether or ignore it or put it aside. It's that we get to a place where we're able to recognize those signals, respond in an efficient and beneficial way, so that we can steward it well, where we now are only making our thoughts about our body and our focus on it a small part of our day rather than the primary focus. So that's kind of the goal of working towards this level of interoceptive awareness, or this first component of body trust.
That is huge. Yes, the relief of not thinking 24/7, well, other than when you're sleeping, about what am I going to eat? What do I look like? What am I doing? Everything. It's all consuming. And so there's freedom in a lot of different levels. I think there is that physical freedom. There's also just, you free up mentally, you free up, spiritually too. Anything that we put ahead of God, is an idol. And so having your thoughts freed from thinking about your body and food all the time gives you more time to invest in your relationship with God, which is how it should be. So
yes,
I think
so valuable.
It really is. So thank you for walking through the steps. And I hope anyone listening who is very intrigued by Tell Me More, at the end, Brittany's going to share how you can work with her. And also that'll be in the show notes as well. So I really hope that everyone who's super interested in this process and wants to learn more and wants to find that freedom will follow you and learn more. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. And then you have talked so much about God being part of this process, and I love it. That's really the core of this podcast and why I wanted to have conversations that do bring God into it, because it is such an important factor in any recovery. And I know that, it's what God wants for us too. If you're struggling, that is not how God designed it. This is not how he designed food in our society to be, or our bodies. And, he designed us and created us so special, each of us for a reason. So thank you for, again, pouring out your heart on how God fits into this and should be the core of this process. So I would love for you to also share any advice to someone who's struggling now and they're really hesitant to talk to a professional. What would you tell that person?
Well, I think first, if you're hesitant to reach out, it's often because there's some level, like you feel some level of shame
Mm.
there that like sometimes there's a lot of shame around, I feel like I don't deserve help, or I feel like I'm not quote unquote sick enough to need help. Or maybe somebody in your life has invalidated the struggle that you're going through. And so, number one, I would just say again, there is no criteria for what, like, you don't have to check any specific boxes in order to need or deserve help. So if you are considering, if you have been living with stress, anxiety, disordered eating, negative body image for any length of time, the sooner you get support and accountability, and I'm not just talking about someone cheering you on in your corner. That's awesome. That can be a means of support, but you need both support and accountability. And so if you don't have accountability, that's a whole nother conversation. Like, what's the difference in support and accountability? You need somebody that can call you up and call you out from that accountability standpoint. And it is such wisdom. It is not weakness to ask for help. It's such wisdom to say, hey, I need somebody in my corner who can help me get through this process with more ease, more efficiently, and with less stress and anxiety than trying to piecemeal it on my own.
Yeah, I love that. It's so easy to think I'm going to do this on my own and, kind of white knuckle it and hope for the best. And like you said, there is strength in being able to say I need help. That is a strong person. That is not weak. That is not weak.
Yes.
So please, anyone listening to this who's hesitating right now, know that you would be very strong to ask for help and seek it. Um, Now, to someone who is maybe a friend or family member of a person who is struggling now, is there any advice you would give to that person who said, I don't know how to help. I want to be maybe that accountability on, in addition to some professional help, but I'm not sure how to even approach the subject, or I'm not sure how to help, or what not to say either. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. I have so many, but I will boil it down to two things because I work with a ton of college students. I this issue with like negative body image and disorder eating is not specific to age. It's not limited, right? I've seen very young children up to like I've worked with women in their 80s. Um, but because I see a lot of college students, I'm frequently talking to their families as well. And as a family member, or even if you're not a family member, even if you just have a friend or loved one who struggles, one of the best things that you can do is seek education for yourself. And especially if you're a close family member and you're trying to support someone, especially like within your own household or like a roommate, getting some kind of support yourself can be really helpful, whether it is getting some psychoeducation. You can do that with a therapist to just become more aware. You can work with a dietitian. You can do that, through self-paced content, whether it's a course or reading some books. But especially being able to talk with somebody and say, hey, here's the kind of conversations they're having. How can I support them? that can be so extraordinarily beneficial. You can absolutely get tons of benefit from talking with someone who is a professional in the field to say, hey, here's what I'm understanding about it. Here's how they're communicating. How can I support them better? So I think that's a huge, huge benefit.
I think that's something that's interesting because when I started sharing my own story, I have gotten a lot of people who reach out to me and they're not the ones struggling and they don't know what to do. And so that's not something I expected. And that's why I wanted to ask you that question because I know there are people listening now who they're not struggling, but they know someone who is and they
Yeah.
want to be there for them. And if you would, like going back to kind of something you said a few minutes ago about the difference between like support and accountability, I think is what you said. If you want to touch on that a little bit, I would love to hear, or for anyone
Yeah.
listening to who might just wonder, what does that look like?
Yeah. So somebody who is a support person, um, that is typically going to be the person that's like, I'm the cheerleader for you. I'm cheering you on. I want to be here for you. Tell me what I can do to help. All right. You're kind of seeking the person who's struggling and saying, what do you need from me? How can I help? Versus the person who is giving accountability. And sometimes this may be the same person, but oftentimes you need to have, you don't always want the person living in your home to always be your primary accountability person because it can be really difficult to have really healthy boundaries. And sometimes, especially for someone who's really struggling a lot, especially when it comes to food, let's say they've been highly restrictive or they're engaging in a lot of eating disorder type years, they may need someone else to be the person to check in on them and not say, hey, what all do you need? But hey, this was the goal that we set, or this was the behavior we were working on. Let me just be really straight front. Like, we're not going to sugarcoat it. Has this thing happened? And if it has, like, how are we going to address that moving forward? And so this kind of has to be like that, it's not always, if it's an adolescent struggling, sometimes this may need to be the parent, but you may need to have somebody outside of your family too, doesn't have that same type of relationship with you, family relationship where they can say, hey, from non-bias standpoint, here's what I'm seeing, and we need to do something to address this, right? And so there's going to be that typically makes room for a little bit more. I won't say headbutting, but it might feel a little bit um, more more like conflict sometimes. It's not always conflict, right? There's absolutely ways to go about it peacefully and in a way that is beneficial to the person struggling. But that can be a difficult thing to navigate in the beginning. And so again, that's where it's really helpful to bring in a professional and say, how can we structure accountability at home in a way that doesn't feel like I'm being overbearing or nagging or, like constantly on their back or on their case. So yeah, that's just a really important part of it. You got to have both pieces, both support and accountability.
Yeah, that's a good point of, talking through especially like an adolescent and a parent situation. And I think some people, everyone's relationship is different between, a parent and a child, and some, that might work well, and others, we've all been teenagers and know that it's not always fun to listen to your parents regardless of what they're saying, let alone about an eating disorder or disordered eating. We don't always want to listen to them about anything. So that's, I think that's important to note that if you're struggling in that area and you think I'm not getting through, it may just be that's just the dynamic between parents and kids. So I think that I didn't think about that, but that's I'm really glad you brought that up. So
Yeah. And that can happen in the context of marriage too, which is
oh
really
yeah.
important to have somebody outside of it. Because if you feel like, hey, my spouse is telling me what to do, or my spouse is, I feel like they're constantly watching me, that can make it really hard in the relationship too. So when you can bring in like a third party kind of person and say, hey, can you be the one to give me accountability? Or I can get certain types of accountability from my spouse, but I might need some other types of accountability that I don't feel comfortable with them providing, or that, our relationship can't really handle that level of accountability right now. So I need you to do that. Can also be really helpful.
I'm glad you brought that up too. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, that's I recovered before I married my husband, so that wasn't a factor in our relationship, but I could see how that could very easily become a huge challenge. So wherever you're at, um, not only on the spectrum of food freedom, but also age and just that season of life. Know that this is possible for anyone. So on the flip side, is there anything you would say that is not helpful to say to someone who is struggling? So this would be coming from a friend or a family member. I know a lot of people are very hesitant. They're like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And is there anything you would say avoid saying at all costs, or is there anything you would say to just, sometimes it's just going to be, it doesn't matter what you say, it might just be taken wrong because it's not, they're not ready to receive
Right.
it.
Right. Um, I mean, this is probably one of the biggest questions that I get from
Mm.
family members and friends. I get this a lot from college roommates going, I want to be supportive, but I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing and make it worse. Um, the sad truth is there are probably lots of things that you can say that they're going to take in a way that's going to feel like it makes it worse. So the first thing I would say to do is if you are a support person for someone, like ask them what types of things do you want support on? What kind of things are helpful from a language standpoint, especially. So just as a general kind of guideline rule of thumb, if you haven't had that conversation, number one, use neutral language around food. Don't refer to food as good, bad, clean, like junk, healthy, unhealthy. Those kind of terms are going to moralize food, meaning like we're going to associate things that are good or bad. And if I eat something bad, then I'm bad. Now I'm going to take on that guilt and shame, right? So avoid moralizing language at all. Like try to refer to food as neutral as possible. And then you want to generally avoid statements like, well, just eat more or just don't use that behavior, right? Like eating disorder behaviors are not used willy nilly. It's not like, I think I'll just, stop eating today, or I think I'm just going to cut this food group out. But just keep in mind those behaviors are serving a purpose, whether they're as beneficial as the person who's struggling with thinks they are or not. They're serving a purpose in their mind for some reason. They're meeting some type of need. And so have some grace. Don't let it, like, we don't want to sort of inadvertently condone the behaviors, but just keep that in mind when it comes to the way that you speak about it. And who also want to be really careful with statements. This might sound controversial, but like, you just need to pray about it more, or you just need to go to church and talk to your pastor, because that can be a form of kind of some like spiritual abuse too. To be like, well, if this was, if you really love the Lord, you should just pray about it more and it'll go away. Yes, we can absolutely pray about this process, and we need to, and it's beneficial. And we might also need some additional support or accountability with that. So those are just a few things to keep in mind.
Thank you again. So many words of wisdom. The part at the end about just you need to pray about it more. No one ever told me that, but I used to tell myself that. So if you're out there listening and you think you can beat yourself up internally as well, just on the shame and the guilt. And for so many years, I thought that I didn't have enough faith, or I wasn't trying hard enough to give it to God, and that it was completely my fault. And that's not to say it's still not my choice, to then surrender, as you've mentioned earlier, but at the same time knowing that, yeah, it's not something you can necessarily pray away, or one day you'll wake up and God will heal you miraculously. I'm not saying God can't do miracles, but it's definitely,
Right.
it definitely it's a process. And just and surrender to God is a process. This is a daily choice to
Yes.
lay it down. And it's not like, oh, I did this once, so now I should be good. No, every single day. And we all do that with any number of things that we all have to surrender to God at any given time. It's always a daily surrender. And even there's so many verses in the Bible that talk about like daily take up your cross and all of that. So yes, if you are even hearing this from your own mind and not from other people, know that um, those are lies from the enemy,
Yes.
and there is truth to be found through God and His Word. So that's no, I love that you shared a lot of different a range of thoughts for whoever's listening. I hope you at least have one thing that you can take away from this, if not multiple, to if you're in that situation where you really want to help. Thank you. And I want to give you a chance to share more about how people could work with you and, you know, whether it's following you on social, joining your group, working with you individually, what does that look like? Where can people start?
Yeah, the best way to get connected and just to find the service maybe that would fit you best is on my website at brittanybraswellrd.com. You can find out there about, if you are someone who is struggling, we have a brand new membership called the Joy-Filled Food Freedom Society, and that is where you get free access to my Joy-Filled Eater course curriculum. And then we do live coaching every month. We have guest experts, therapists, strength trainers, people who have recovered, sharing some type of a lesson or story. And then we have support all throughout the week. So if you don't have community, if you need some support and accountability, it's a great place to find it. I'm there from the accountability side, and you have tons of women who are going to be there to support you. And then if you're listening and you're catching this as somebody who loves someone who is struggling and you want some education on this yourself, going through the Joy-Filled Eater course is a great way to get that education and to learn alongside your loved one, like, hey, here's some ways that I can support you. And okay, this makes sense maybe as to why this feels like a struggle. So those are some great ways to get involved. And then, of course, I'd love to hang out with you guys on the Joyful Eater podcast every week. We currently release new episodes on Tuesdays, and we'll probably be expanding that over the next couple months. So love to hang out with y'all there.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I will put all of that in the show notes. So if you didn't catch that, you don't have to write it down. It will be there. Just take a look and please do follow Brittany, learn as much as you can from the resources that she's sharing. And yes, community is so important at any stage of recovery. It's so invaluable. So are there anything else you're working on that you might want to share about besides, podcasts? Or I know you mentioned there might be expanding. I just want to give you space to share if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah, well, we've always got things that are growing and changing based on kind of our clients and students and what they're asking for and need. So the best way that you can find out about that, if you want to get on our VIP list, we send out just a weekly word of encouragement every Tuesday. So that includes information about the podcast episode, announcements, like when we're bringing on new interns or when I have openings for new coaching clients. So y'all can check that out. If you go to brittanybraswellrd.com/VIP, our VIP subscribers get first notification about anything new that's happening. And I like to send out free resources there occasionally, just for fun. I like to give gifts. So it's a great place to hang out where you can stay up to date with all the things going on.
Well, you have a lot to offer, and I feel like something for everyone. So, especially if you are listening and you just want to learn, I love that there's a resource for you to go through the course and learn alongside your loved one or your friend or whoever that is in your life. If you're struggling, please do that. I think the support would be so welcomed. So, thank you, Brittany, for everything you've shared, and so excited for everyone to listen to this. I know it's going to help a ton of people. And thank you for your heart to help so many women out there who will then continue to spread that around. The more people who get help, seek help, recover, find freedom, the more that joy is going to spread, because they're going to talk about it. If you have found freedom, you are going to spread the joy, and you're going to want everyone else to find it too. So it's just such a neat process to just see how that spreads around, and we just want everyone to find the joy. So
yes. So thank you again for having me, Jamie. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Of course. I really appreciate you.
Hey friend, I hope this conversation encouraged you today, and if it did, please let me know by rating and reviewing the Recover with God podcast wherever you are listening. Your feedback helps others find this podcast too. And click that follow button so you don't miss new episodes airing every Wednesday this season. Be sure to check out the show notes for all the links and additional resources we talked about today. And don't forget, whether you need help or you want to help, all help comes from God.